Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Women Serve 2. Today we have Elise Salamone Fernandez Payne. So, Salamone is how she built her business, but let us tell you that she is a 27-year military combat veteran, a decorated officer, and a women's health nurse practitioner. As a career ownership coach, Elise has mastered the art of guiding clients through adversity that has earned her the title of professional cheerleader. Hailing from Puerto Rico, Elise was raised by a resilient single mother who instilled in her the tenacity to conquer any challenge. Elise has transformed her life experiences into a wellspring of inspiration to others. She motivates people to reclaim their power from past traumas and channel it into crafting their most extraordinary lives. When she's not igniting a passion for ass kicking and risk taking, Elise can be found traveling the world, cooking, reading, or watching the sunsets off her deck, not desk, outside deck.
Sometimes
Elise,
I'm working a little.
sometimes you have to when you're working, right? Elise, welcome so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
You
So,
are.
27 years. Wow. Okay. And you retired as lieutenant colonel. Like, what was your journey like?
So thank you for having me, Brittany. So my journey started in high school. Right out of high school, I always knew my mom really taught it like, education, but I was one of those students that I got through high school, but I wasn't like the greatest student. And so there was a couple of people on my street, a couple of kids that went into the military, and I just kind of became fascinated with the whole uniform and just the whole adventure side because I've always wanted to travel. So I joined the Army, enlisted in the Army right out of high school, and I always tell this story because I wanted to see the world. And I grew up in Connecticut, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and did basic training at Fort Jackson, and then did my MOS training in Indiana. And, everyone's getting their orders as to where they're going next for the first duty station. And people are getting orders to like Germany, Japan, Korea, all these cool places. And I get orders to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And I'm like,
Far is that from where you were
it's like an
raised?
hour south from where I grew up. And nothing against New Jersey, but I was like, that is not what I had in mind when I envisioned these world travels. So anyways, I spent a year at Fort Dix, and then a year later, I was coming back from somewhere and I just had this vision that I had gotten orders to Korea. And sure shit, I get back to the base and I had orders to Korea. So I did get my adventure. I spent a year in Camp Humphreys, which was phenomenal, and really ignited my love for travel. And then I came back, I got out of the Army, got married, had my son, and went to nursing school. And once I finished nursing school, I really knew that like the civilian sector wasn't for me and I wanted to come back on active duty, but it was right after the Gulf War. So the Army was scaling down their medical forces. So that's how I got a commission in the Army Reserve, but I really wanted to come back on active duty. And that's how I ended up in the Air Force. So I got commissioned in the Air Force and served in Afghanistan, did all the, Air Force officer stuff. And retired in 20 after, 27 years total of military service and a stint in Germany doing the CASIP, which is bringing in all the wounded warriors and taking care of that, which in the Air Force is considered deployment, and then also served in Afghanistan. And in 2015, I retired and I said it was time to move on.
Oh my goodness. So, as you worked through the ranks, like how was that, when going from Army to Air Force? Because I bet that was a culture difference. And then also going from, because were you enlisted when you first joined?
Yeah, I was enlisted and then got commissioned as an officer. So, I am the kind of person that I just always make the best out of everything. And for me, I was very naive. I mean, I was 18 when I joined the military and no one in my family had ever been in the military. So there was no one guiding me or mentoring through this. So to me, it was just this big adventure. And I just kind of took one day at a time and took advantage of every opportunity that I could, whether I was in the Army or Air Force. And I was very lucky. I had a really great career, a very thriving career, a fun career. And frankly, I probably would have stayed in a little bit longer after I got promoted to lieutenant colonel. But I was at a point where I had some personal stuff going on and I was going through a divorce, and coming back from Afghanistan was a little rough. And, no one really guided or mentored me to tell me not to make any decisions so close after coming back from deployment. And in hindsight, I probably really should have done one more assignment, but, hindsight's 20. So I think if I have any advice for anyone that's listening is if you're coming back from deployment, do not make any life decisions for at least a couple of years after you come back, because you're just adjusting. And frankly, for me, it was a good 5 years after deployment that I started kind of feeling normal again. And I kind of got back to my old self, and not my old self, but that I was thinking more with clarity and kind of was getting more focused on what I wanted to do with my life. But by then, I had a divorce and I retired from the Air Force and I was in the civilian sector trying to figure it out. And, so here I am.
Yeah, and you have like your own business, which we'll definitely talk about. With everything that's going on in the Middle East again, like we're yesterday there was that attack on 3 service members that died. Suppose the numbers increasing, but right now it's 40 or 50 injured. What are some things that, you wish you done when you got back from your deployment or when you were preparing for your deployment?
That's a great question. So let me tell you a little bit of how I got deployed because this will then make a little bit more sense. So I had just graduated from a nurse practitioner program, which the Air Force sent me on an assignment. And I came back and I was stationed in Colorado. And one day I was in the clinic and I was working as a nurse practitioner at that point. And I saw there were these emails about women, like active duty women being served. They were doing missions in Afghanistan to do like the women female treatment teams and all of that. And again, that was another time in my life where I literally called my husband at the time and I said, I have a feeling I'm going to get deployed soon. And he's like, oh, stop it. You just got out of school and you just got to Colorado and all that. So what ended up happening that Friday, my commander came and says, hey, I need to talk to you and you're getting deployed. And we really don't know what the mission is. We just know that it's going to be a joint task and you're going to Afghanistan and you literally need to go start getting your stuff ready now. So I got told on a Friday and I was gone the following Friday to go do training, ironically, combat skills training in Fort Dix. Here I go back to Fort Dix 25 years later, now as a major, because I was a major at the time. And then I land in Afghanistan. That deployment was really interesting because none of us really knew what we were going to be doing there. We just knew we were attached to Special Forces and not just Special Forces Army, but also with the Navy SEALs. And when I got to my FOB, which was Tinsley, I got there and still had really no idea what we were supposed to be doing. And it was a little bit of a shit show, frankly. But, again, I made the best of it. I used my skills to help the local villagers with medical skills. And I was essentially the camp doctor, even though I was with Special Forces and they had a medic. But I was the one that was kind of running daily clinic missions to establish relationships with the locals. When I came back, because I was a one-off on this deployment, it's not like the Navy or the Army where usually they deploy as teams. The Air Force has a habit of sending people on these onesies. And unfortunately, those are really challenging because you get to these compounds and you're the only one out of your unit. And a lot of times, particularly, I land on the Special Forces camp and I had like 6 strikes against me. I was an Air Force officer. I was a major. I was a female. I had lipstick on because I wear lipstick no matter what's going on in the world. And, and they were like, what are you doing here? And I was like, I don't know. I really don't know what I'm doing here, but, put me to work. So I really just had to make the best of it. But what happened was that deployment was really challenging in a lot of ways. In particular, we lost a few people. There really was no clear mission for me. I did what I could do and I got involved and took care of patients and took care of the team or whatever. But then coming back, it was really hard because I came back and no one really knew what I had done out there. And my guys were still deployed and there were Army Special Forces and 2 different Special Forces groups. And I came back and it was really hard to just kind of get readjusted to life because I had gone through some stuff and nothing like super bad, but we had lost people at the time. When I left for Afghanistan, my husband at the time had just moved to Colorado. We had finally gotten a joint assignment after being gone, separated from each other for over a year. So there was some personal stuff that was going on. And then, and I get back to my unit and they're like, okay, go back to work. Just like nothing happened, like nobody really bothered asking me what happened out there. My ex-husband, who's now my ex-husband, was at, he was Army colonel and he was like, just forget what happened out there. Just kind of like, look, we have this great house and we're getting close to retirement and all that. And I just had a hard time really adjusting to all of that because, here I was in Afghanistan and you realize the things that are important. And it was the first time that I always tell people, listen, if you join the military, there's some great benefits. I had a great military career. I took advantage of everything. However, the military, still the number one mission is war. So you have to realize that deployment is their number one mission. So if you're not committed and understand what that means, or you don't have the courage to say, yes, that's what I'm doing and that's what I'm here for, then the military is not for you. And I didn't have a problem with that. But the problem was difficult when you come back to a unit and none none of your commanders had deployed. Nobody you worked with had deployed. And I didn't deploy with anybody from my unit. And I really didn't have anyone to kind of talk to about some of the issues and concerns and just, like just feelings of guilt, and like you lose people out there and you really, it was just a whole thing. And I think that, for all the shit that people give the Army and maybe even the Navy on deployments, is that at least they deploy as a team. And I think that makes a really big difference.
Yeah, I guess I never really thought about that too, like how the Army deploys. Because my uncle was Army and he would always deploy with a team. And then when my husband deployed, yeah, several times, it's always been just him. I was
Yeah.
always deployed at station. So I would just go to work, do the mission, and then have 15 to 30 minutes to decompress from what we saw slash did.
Yeah.
So, when he came back from Afghanistan, one of the things that I've noticed too was it was like a 2-week check-in thing where they didn't do anything. And I can't remember what it was called, but then he went to, yeah. And then he, just went right back to work. And I know he saw some fucked up shit. And even 14 years later, and he's like slowly trying to like talk about it.
Yeah.
When I get him a couple beers, like, cause he won't talk about it.
Yeah.
So like, what do you think, like, in your opinion, needs to happen transitioning from, going to a war zone to coming back home? Because you're right. The military is, the number one thing is war. But just because like you're okay with it and you do what you're doing and you're doing the mission doesn't mean it doesn't fuck with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because my ex-husband had never deployed. He was an Army colonel, National Guard, active duty guard. And he says, you're a nurse. You are trained to do this. And I'm like, no, not really. I wasn't trained to like, first of all, one of the things that happened too when I was deployed was we had one of our chief nurses send out this email to all the nurse practitioners and said, hey, if you're working out of your scope of practice, you can get, there could be lawsuits, you can lose your license, whatever. Yet here I'm put in a situation where I'm absolutely working out of my scope of practice because I had no other choice. And all the other nurse practitioners that were friends of mine that kind of were watching my Facebook and knew what I was doing, they're like, hey, you need to send, so-and-so, this colonel, a letter and let her know that what you're doing out there, which quickly eventually led to that particular mission that I was working on completely getting nixed by the Air Force because they realized that we were totally working and out of our scope of practice, but doing things that we had no business doing. We were teams that we had no business being there with. But I think, coming back in a transition when you deploy, I think the military needs to do a better job of not just giving us those 2 weeks of transition. No. Have therapy involved, have people like immediately get into some form of support group where they're talking about what they saw and what they did. Because to me, telling your story is so therapeutic, but you have to be able to have the space for people to listen and actually hear your story, and a safe space for you to tell your story without feeling like you're being judged or you're going to get in trouble or whatever it is. And unfortunately, that's not there as a support or resource, when we come back from deployment. However, I will tell you, because my mom is a nurse and she's always believed in therapy, I got into therapy almost immediately after coming back because I knew I needed it. I knew I needed a safe space to talk about not just what I had done and seen, but just some of the personal, emotional stuff that I was struggling with, like coming back and dealing with a husband that just didn't get it, and dealing with relationship shit that was going on before I deployed that now all of a sudden is like blowing up because I have just this different life experience that impacted me. So I think if you're deploying and you're coming back, you really need to you need to just kind of take care of yourself and know, it's like, I probably need to do some therapy, whether it is finding a therapist within the system or doing military one source, which was where I started, and getting that therapy so that if you don't have anyone to talk to, that you really have that intentional therapy, safe space to talk about the things that you saw and how to process that. So that you can continue to thrive and be productive as a member of society.
Mm-hmm. I agree with the whole therapy thing because, and someone else actually mentioned that in another podcast because they think, just talking about it instead of keeping it deep down. You said that, once you're coming back from deployment, not to make any rash decisions. And it took you about 5 years, but you were already going to therapy. Like, can you talk a little bit about kind of that whole process, your train of thought?
Yeah. So I say that because, I think when you get married, it's for better or for divorce, right? And I think, you love that person when you get married. And I think if my husband and I at the time really had been intentional about really seeking couples therapy and having him not be judgmental about some of the stuff that I went through, I think we could work through that, because we loved each other. So, but I think I was I don't like using the word broken because I wasn't broken, but I think I was so emotionally exhausted and burnt out from everything. And then dealing with work and how my commanders just kind of threw me back into work and they're like, oh, you're war tested. So now, I'm going to give you all the problem children and I'm going to have you run a clinic and do all this stuff that was, yeah, it got me into a routine and got my mind off of things, but it was also pretty kind of stressful. And I just wasn't always there. I was like thinking about other stuff and contemplating life and things that I had witnessed. And I think that it's important, to me, when I look back in hindsight, I made a rash decision to retire based on what was going on in my personal life. And I think if someone would have mentioned me and said, hey, you just got back from deployment, you're still healing from that, you're still dealing with a lot of stuff, don't make a rash decision to leave a career that you actually really love because you're dealing with this. And I wish somebody would have told me that, but it took me 5 years to kind of look back in hindsight and say, oh, you know what? That probably wasn't the smartest thing to make that rash decision to get divorced. I think even if my husband and I would have separated, probably would have been helpful versus actually just divorcing and blowing everything up, which is basically what I did. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it needs to happen, like you go through this huge life experience and sometimes you need to come back and say, fuck it, I'm blowing everything up and I'm starting over it, which is essentially what I did. But yeah, I just think people coming back from deployment really should have that space to say, no, don't make any major rash decisions at this time. If you need to kind of step away from the relationship right now, step away from it, but don't make that decision. That's a final decision at this point. If you need to make a decision about your career, maybe take some time to step away from it and really evaluate what it is that you really want, or get the therapy that you need, the support you need, so that you're not making these really major life decisions right now when you're still healing from the deployment, because I don't know, I can't think of any other word, but you just went through this major crazy experience that 99% of the population don't understand. Mm-hmm. And you have to know that it doesn't matter what your training is, that it's going to affect you as a human being. It's going to affect you when you have seen death, when you have seen people that you care about die, when you see work, when you're pushed to eliminate your work, so you're like, I don't feel confident to be doing the things I'm doing, but I have to because I have no other choice. Dealing with the interpersonal relationships that you were dealing with when you deployed, and then coming back and not having that support and nobody to really say, hey, let's talk about, I could see that you're having a bad day, because no one, when I came back to the clinic, it was all a new staff, so no one really knew me before I deployed. And so now I'm like, I'm a major getting ready to get promoted to lieutenant colonel, and I'm a leader, so I have to lead by example and all this other stuff. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out my shit coming back. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's important to acknowledge that you went through this major life event and that you need to find a safe space to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, it's almost desensitizing you so that you can continue to move on. And you don't forget about those experiences, but you're able to see the pros and cons and kind of figure out, okay, this is part of my story. It was a chapter, but now it's time to move on to my next chapter, learning from those lessons that I had and into, my next chapter in life. But don't let it consume you to the point where, you get depressed, you're doing, substances to deal with this pain or trauma that you dealt with. But I think we need to be intentional on how we do that. We need to realize that sometimes you need to just ask for help.
Mm-hmm. Because you and your husband or ex-husband were dual military. So he kind of like understood the mission, if you will, even though he never deployed. So how could someone who is dual military or not even married to a military spouse, like how can you have that communication to where, you're like, I need help, this is how I'm feeling, and still reconnecting? Because at the same time, depending on the mission, you may not be able to talk about the actual mission. So what advice would you give to someone who did deploy or is deploying, and how to, have that open communication with their spouse?
I think it's giving that person space to talk about whatever they can talk about and giving them that safe space to say, hey, I'm here. I'm willing to just sit and listen, because sometimes it's just listening because you weren't there, so you can't give advice. All you can do is create a space that is supportive and loving. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in our own ego ego that we realize, you're hearing your person talk about this stuff and you want to fix it, but they don't need fixing. They just need someone to listen. So sometimes it's just listening. And then sometimes it's not even asking questions, because they're going to tell you what they need to tell you at whatever timing they have. But if you can't provide that space for them, then encourage them to either do a support group or seek ways to be able to get what's in your heart and what's you've experienced out of your head, so that you can actually deal with it and move on.
That's like the one thing that I definitely like that you said was sometimes just listen and don't ask questions. You don't have to say something, because sometimes as women, we're caretakers, but even, in other situations, you want to take care of their problem.
Yeah.
So you want to give advice, you want to ask questions, but sometimes it's just, that person just needs to just let it out.
Yeah.
And I think that is a huge takeaway is sometimes you'll probably ask them, what do you want from me? And the response will be, I just need you to listen.
Yeah.
And I think that's so huge. So
Yeah.
you went through this deployment, you did 27 years. I know you said 26, but 27. Talk about your transition from, being active duty to, your civilian life.
Yeah, so I retired in 20 after I had an incident at work, speaking about not making major decisions, where my commanders actually pissed me off. And I was just like, you know what? I'm so done. I'm just done. And I dropped my retirement paperwork there. And it was a rash decision, but I am very much a planner. So the minute I knew I was going to retire, I kind of started looking for jobs. And I'm blessed in the sense that I have a skill set. I was a nurse practitioner where I could pretty much work anywhere. But one of the transition things that I will say as a piece of advice to others with wisdoms is, if you're leaving the military and getting out of the military, make sure you have some kind of plan. Make sure that you understand where you're going and how you're getting there. Because I think so many of us get out of the military and we don't have a plan, and that's when we flounder. That's when we might find ourselves homeless. That's when we might find ourselves not having any support systems around us. So I always tell people that when you retire or separate from the military, don't move somewhere just because of a job. The job may not be there 6 months later, it may not be there a year later. Move somewhere where you either have family, if you're close to family, or have a support network. And I'm not talking about other active duty friends, because they're going to move too. So go somewhere where, you have a stable support system, whether it's siblings, family, friends that are out of the military, and so forth. And figure out what it is what you want out of where you live. So for example, for me, I always said the example, I always wanted to live somewhere that I was close to an airport, because I love to travel. And to me, I needed to be at least within an hour to an airport. I always wanted to be close to universities, because I'm a lifelong learner. And usually if there's universities, the community is diverse. As much as I love the country, I don't want to be driving a half hour to get milk. So being somewhat close to resources for day-to-day living. And for me, I love nature. So I wanted a beautiful space to live in or to be close to. So that's kind of how I ended up in Washington, but mainly I've always wanted to live in the Seattle area. But for me, I came here because of a job. And the one thing I didn't take into consideration, which is why I give this advice, is that all my family's on the East Coast. I grew up on the East Coast. All my support network, my really dear friends are all on the East Coast. So I found myself here in Washington, loving the area. But then when I left that job, I was like, do I stay here? Do I move back? Do I stay here? Do I move back? And here's the thing. Once you leave the military and you make that first major move, moving is super expensive. For those people that don't know, like moving back from Washington back to the East Coast would have cost me like 20 grand. And I just didn't have the money to do that. And I didn't want to spend the money doing that. So luckily for me at that point, I had been living in my house, and I bought my house, and I met my current husband, and I were dating. And the thing for me is that I really love where I live, even though I'm far from family. But in hindsight, if I had to look back, I would have made more of an effort to live closer to family. So at least be within driving distance to family, because I'm close to my family. So, I got out of the Air Force, went to work a GS job at Madigan Army Medical Center, worked there for 3 years, got really burned out. And again, made an emotional decision and quit after I just was really burned out. Again, don't make emotional decisions. Really take time to sleep on them. I'm learning as I get older. It's taken me almost 60 years to figure this out. And then I had a couple other civilian jobs. And the second civilian job after that, I got laid off after 6 months, which was great because I was not a good fit for me. And I literally laid in bed earlier that week and was like, this cannot be my life. God gave me a sign and I got laid off. And then I was out of work for 6 months. And here's the thing, for all veterans that are getting out of service, do not think that the civilian sector owes you anything or that you are entitled to a job just because you're a veteran, because it does not work that way. You still have to meet qualifications. You still have to interview well. And you still have to be able to produce. And just because you're a veteran doesn't mean that you're going to get a job, in a snap. I'm a nurse practitioner with 2 masters and over 30 years experience. And I spent a good 6-7 months out of work. And it wasn't because I wasn't looking for work either. It was the job market here just kind of stinks for what I do. So I finally got another job and I had to think outside the box. So I was looking for nurse practitioner jobs, couldn't find them. And then I applied for regular nursing jobs. And then they came back, interviewed me, had offered me the job. And then they said, hey, we have a manager position. You meet all the requirements. You want to try? I said, yes, negotiate. You have to be savvy. You got to think outside the box. And then I negotiated with them to see patients twice a week so that I can keep my NP license going. And 15 months into that job, I got called in one day and got terminated. Just like that. No warnings, no nothing. And after that, I realized I can't keep doing the same thing over and over again, which is working for other people and expect a different result. So that's when I invested in my franchise, the Entrepreneur Source, which, do coaching to help people understand what business ownership can do for them through franchising. And that's what I've been doing the last 3 years. A couple of years ago, I got a part-time gig as working at a spa, so I can still maintain my nurse practitioner license. But I think some of the things that I've learned through that is being innovative, thinking outside the box when it comes to your job search, and also willing to do things that may not be in your wheelhouse, but willing to learn and staying open and curious, because sometimes those opportunities can lead to other things.
God, that's crazy. And like it just being terminated, like with no whatsoever notice.
No warning.
It's
Yeah.
insane to me.
Yeah. And so I will talk to specifically to your female veteran audience is that, when you come out of military service, depending on what your career was like, you come out of service and you think, I have all this experience, all this leadership, all this management knowledge, you have all these degrees and training or whatever. And that's all great. However, in the civilian sector, what's been really tough, particularly for someone with my background, is that people want to hire me for my resume because I'm articulate, I have all this work experience, and I'm a good professional and all of that. The problem is that they hire you and then they really don't support you for the job that you want, that you're hired to do. Or you do it so well, so casually, that the other people in those jobs get intimidated by the work you're doing when you're like, particularly at my last official W job, I was only working probably a 70% capacity because I already got the culture of the place I was working for that they really didn't want to improve things because that was the culture there. And my supervisor was not the most efficient person in the world. And I could run circles around them. I mean, I retired as a lieutenant colonel. I've managed missions and operations and all this stuff. Yeah. And, every single time I tried to do something to improve, my supervisor manager said, we can't do that. Well, I would do it anyways because I knew we could. And then things would get better and the staff was happy. And then she was like, oh. So we have to understand that sometimes all our training and how we use our veteran status is actually can be very intimidating to others, especially in the civilian sector, when they don't really understand our experience. They want our experience. They say they're veteran friendly, but in reality, they're not. And what made it worse was that my manager at the time was also a retired Army major. So so there's a lot of drama behind that. And when I got let go, I just knew, I said, I can't work for other people anymore. I have to try to do something different. And I'm not saying that entrepreneurship or business ownership is easy, because it's not. It really isn't. It has multiple different challenges and frustrations, but I knew that I had at least to try to do something different because I kept working in these healthcare organizations where I didn't feel appreciated. I was working my butt off. I was burned out and I wasn't getting paid my worth. So it's kind of like, okay, what do you do now? You have to do something different to try to see if it works. Now, it may not work. I don't consider it fail. I just consider a learning lesson and just move on to the next thing. But that's where my resilience, if you talk to anybody that knows me, they're like, Elise is the most resilient person you'll ever meet. She's been through it all and she just kind of tosses back and just moves on. But that's just my personality.
I love that. That's just so amazing. So obviously you were tired of working for someone else. What was, and you had to pivot. So what made you decide to choose franchising instead of another route?
I've always been interested in business ownership, but I never had any mentors or any family members that I'd done business ownership. So I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to run a business. And the thing with franchising is it's if you can follow a checklist and follow a system, you can thrive, which is why veterans are some of the most successful franchise owners, actually, because we know, in order to be a good franchise owner, business owner, you need to be resilient, persevere, working, hard worker, think outside the box, and just hustle. And that's what we do in the military. We figure out innovative results or innovative solutions for problems that are unique. We know how to lead teams. We have that leadership and management. We're resilient. We are adaptable, and that's what makes us really successful when we are franchise business owners. So I linked up with this business coach like myself, like what I'm doing now, and she presented a couple of different opportunities to me. It took me a year really to make a decision because I was kind of learning about each brand. I think what led me to that route versus doing something on my own is that everything was kind of laid out. So I just kind of had to follow this system. So it's almost like the military, but in business ownership. So yeah, and I was very specific that I wanted to do something remotely. I wanted to work from home. I wanted to utilize my mentorship, leadership, coaching skills to do something to help others. And so that's how I kind of landed with this. In hindsight, I probably should have looked at more of a service brand, meaning that I had other interests that I really should have kind of dug into. Like I love real estate, so I could have done something with real estate, and I still can, but now I'm kind of like, I just want to retire. I'm tired. So yeah, there's a lot of options out there. But now what I do is I help clients that are interested in business ownership but don't know where to start. And they just kind of guide them through that and coach them through that and just kind of really get to know them holistically and then figure out what brands or possibilities are out there for them and just kind of guide them through that journey.
Okay. I like that because I know there's a lot of franchises that are veteran friendly. In your coaching, what are some questions that you kind of ask people to kind of figure out what works best for them?
So my journey and process of what I do is, I get to know the client. I always ask them, what's your origin story? Because it helps me get some clues as to kind of who they are and how they got to where they're at. Also, what are their goals? What are their whys? Why are they considering business ownership? What is it that they're trying to accomplish? For me, it was a change in lifestyle. I really didn't want to have to be somewhere at 7 o'clock. I wanted to work from home, and I also was tired of working for other people. So really understanding your why, whether it's creating generational wealth for your family, improving your lifestyle, changing your lifestyle, getting a better return on your investment, meaning, you're working really hard, but you're not really seeing an increase in your wealth or equity. And also figuring out how do we take all these life and professional experiences and implement them in a business model that's going to give you what you want and what you are trying to accomplish. So really having those conversations and really digging deep into that is what then I take all that information and look at all the different business models. And almost all the businesses, franchises have a veteran discount, which is great. But you also then have to have the resources. What financial sources do you have to leverage? Because it does cost an investment that you can leverage into this business model. What I tell people though, which really is really interesting with the veteran community, is they don't want to lose their money. And it's like, you're not losing your money, you're just reinvesting it in a different way. If you were to start a business on your own, you're going to have to invest money into it. It's the only way you're going to be able to build a business, whether it's marketing plans, CRM systems, employees, all of that. And here in the United States and particularly around the world, almost 60% of brand new startups end up failing within a year because people don't have the capitalization, they don't have the resources, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the support system. And here with franchising, you get a built-in support system. The operations, marketing, standards of operations and policies are already in place. So now you just get to learn that business and now build your business moving forward. So you're capitalizing on a proven system, which is all people think of franchising as an industry, and it's not. It's just a proven business model. So the industry can be anything. And when I talk to people about franchising, just so to educate you as well, is that franchising is a proven business model. So think about the NFL, the National Football League. That's a franchise, right? They have the same playbook. They just use different players. The Harry Potter books, that's a franchise. The Marvel movies, that's a franchise. They have kind of like the same storyline. They just put different players in there to develop, and that's really basically the same thing. So in franchises, there's 45 hundreds of different industries, everything from child services to real estate services to leadership and coaching, business consulting, of course, healthcare stuff. There's all kinds of different models. So when I'm talking to clients and taking notes as they're talking, I'm already thinking about some potential business models that might be of interest to them. So then what I have to do is see, do they have the resources to not only invest, but to support themselves? Because it's not like winning the lottery. You still have to hustle. In the first year, you may not make any money. So you still have to have the resources to invest and actually capitalize. What people don't realize is franchises, everybody thinks are millions of dollars, and they're not. There's franchises that are as slow as 45 to, of course, over $1 million when you're talking about restaurants and all of that. But it's more than just restaurants. It's more than just McDonald's. It's more than 7-Elevens. There's all kinds of different business models out there, and it covers every industry. So really for me, it's getting to know the client and then figuring out the holistic picture of them and then finding those options that will align with what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I'm glad that you talked about you need to invest money to make money. And I always tell
Yeah.
people, like, you got to, use money to make money.
Yeah.
And it is true. And when you do start up, and, when I talk to other people, I feel like a lot of people don't realize the additional cost that comes into like a business. Like you said, the marketing, the time spent on creating content, that's your time. It's still money because
Yeah.
that's money, you could be doing one-on-one consultations, but that social media, which,
Mhm.
tends to be a big one right now.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of like costs that you want to think about going into a business. Like you think, oh, well, I just open up a brick and mortar and I'm just going to make a shit ton of money right away. And it is a slow burn because you have to build up the anticipation. You have to have,
Yeah.
get that clientele and build that rapport. Like it does take some time. So
Yeah.
anyone who is listening, please don't please don't think you're gonna be a millionaire overnight. Like you still gotta hustle.
Yep.
Yeah, you still gotta hustle. And I know, like, we live in a culture where it's instant gratification
Absolutely.
and, it's hard. And you might actually be working more than 40 hours a week trying to set up a business. And resources is a big thing.
Yeah. And here's the difference with what people versus working for somebody else, working for yourself, is that you don't realize if you really enjoy what you're doing, it's not going to feel like you're working 40 hours because it's a labor of love. It's your baby, right? So it's really finding that what is it that you're trying to accomplish and remembering that is what really is going to continue to drive you because, you can work 60 to 80 hours in corporate America, which a lot of us did and do, and even in the military, but you're not building equity. You're not working necessarily on your dream. You're building somebody else's dream. Business ownership is, yeah, you're building on your dream, but it still may take you 60, 40 to, over 40 hours a week, especially the first couple of years until you build that business up. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing it for yourself and doing a brand new startup or you're doing a franchise, you're still going to have to do the work. If you're not willing to do work, then business ownership is not for you. So you have to decide which hard do you choose. Do you choose the hard of working for somebody else and, you have someone controlling your schedule, controlling how much you make, and so forth, and working with people that you either don't care for or don't have any control over the culture? Or do you do something for yourself where you can't create the culture that you want? You can work with the people that you want because you get to hire and fire. And the limits of financial wealth and equity are really based on how much work you're willing to put into it and do. So which hard do you choose? And business ownership is not for everyone. It's not for everyone. And, so there's good and bad with both of them. You just have to decide what is it that you really want to do.
And like you said, too, it may not be for someone, which is totally okay. We're not, saying you have to go the business route. Like, again, choose your
Well,
heart.
I
Like,
know.
if you want to work a 9 to 5, good on you. But if you want, you have to weigh out the pros and cons. And one thing that I do like about franchising is you're right. Like it's already a system's already laid out. It's already test and trialed. You have that rapport, you have that support. So that is especially for veterans who want to transition to going into the business side. That's why franchising is a really good option.
Yeah.
you kind of mentioned earlier how not to retire or make any life decisions real quick. So, say if someone wanted to transition from the military, whether if they're retired or not, like we all know when our contract ends, unless you're a piece of
Yeah.
shit and, get kicked out. Like, so we all know when our transition date is. What advice would you give someone who does want to go like the entrepreneurship, franchising route? How long should they take to set up that transition?
I would say a minimum of a year out. You could do it shorter, depending, especially if you're working with a coach like me, I can help you speed that process up because with the work I do, instead of you looking at a million different options, because I get to know you first and get to figure out what you're looking for, I can help you streamline what the options are for you so that you're only looking at a few options and then help you do your due diligence through that process. Versus if you work with somebody or do it on your own and just do Google searches, it could take you years because there's so many different options, and you really need to do your due diligence with the options because you need to see, you're making a big investment. So you need to figure out how legit is this, but also is this going to help me get to my goals? So at the minimum, I would say 3 months. But if you have the time, you're retiring in a year and you do know that you want to be a business owner and you're interested in franchising, you can start looking at it as soon as you want. But I would say probably no more than a year because the reason I say that is that depending on what kind of franchise you get into, they have territories and in a year a lot can change in business. So, probably, I would say 6 months is a sweet spot. Like 3 months is, you could definitely do it, but 6 months is a sweet spot because that gives you time to work with whoever you're working with. They get to know you. You get a chance to really validate with these different brands. And then funding can take anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks, depending on what kind of funding you're doing. And the other thing for veterans to understand too, and for anyone that's listening, is that there's all kinds of different funding options. If you own a house, if you have a good credit score, if you have a low debt to income ratio, you can use and capitalize all of those things to get the funding you need. It's not just an SBA. You can do, if you have a 4K, you can do a rollover, which is just reinvesting your money in a different way. And the SBA, of course, friends and family. Sometimes, if you have parents that are willing to help and invest in you, or, you can do that. So there's different options for funding, but that alone can take 6 to 12 weeks because it's like applying for a mortgage. You have to do a lot of paperwork. You have to go through certain systems and all of that. So like I said, at a minimum, 3 months, but the sweet spot I would say is probably 4 to 6 months because it probably takes about that long before you really figure out what it is that you want to do.
I'm also glad that you talked about the funding because that was going to be my next question. Because I was like, all I know is SBA loans.
Yeah, no. Yeah. So for anyone that has like different stock options or for you can actually roll over, which is what I did. I had that TSP and I rolled that over into a different retirement account, which I was able to use that money to invest in a franchise and then put the rest in, reinvested it in stocks. And then I had enough working capital for my business, but also was able to pay off my franchise fee. And people don't realize that they can do that. Also, I have a lot of people that if they own a house, you can do a home equity loan, which is a great option. And the reason I like that as an option, especially if you own a home, is because you can then use that money any way you want. Like when you do a 401k rollover in SBA, you can only use it for your business. But let's say that, you do a home equity loan, if you need to do something, you need cash for whatever, you can use it for whatever you want. The bank doesn't care, because you're paying that money back. So capitalizing on any real estate investments you have is a good way to also invest in a business. But, I tell clients, I was like, if you can, a lot of people don't type making loans, but why use your own money? Use somebody else's money to, especially if you know that you're going to do the work and you're going to be successful. And people are like, well, I don't know if I'm going to be successful. What if I fail? And I'm like, have you ever truly failed at anything? Has that really been? And if you fail, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is that you default on a loan, but you're not going to do that because you're a smart, responsible professional. And you will find ways to, the only reason or way that people really fail in business is that they get themselves into trouble where they don't know something and they let their ego get in the way and they don't ask for help. That is the biggest way you get yourself into trouble. And also understanding and knowing when it's time to quit. That's also really important because sometimes you may get into a business and it may not be what you thought it was going to be. And it's okay to be like, you know what, I tried that, but it just didn't turn out to be what I wanted to do. So that's why it's really important that if you are going to if you're interested in franchising, to really work with someone like me that can really guide you and ask those questions so that it help you reflect, because you don't know what you're getting into. And that's where the mentorship and the coaching comes in.
The fitness coach myself, like one thing that I like to tell people is you could do it on your own. You could Google, there's free shit all the time. The point of having a coach is taking the bullshit out. We know what works, we know what doesn't. So if you are serious about it, definitely talk to a coach. Talk to someone who you can eliminate, honestly, probably months of you going around the wheel trying to figure out, what's right, what's bullshit.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so honestly, investing in a coach, regardless in what aspect of life, I think is always like such a
Absolutely.
good investment.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's accountability. It's your accountability partner,
That too.
And I think people forget, like, the most richest and successful people have coaches. You talked about Serena Williams. She has a business coach. She has a tennis coach. She has a physical therapy coach. She's got an OT coach. They have a million coaches, because that way they can, instead of like spinning your wheel doing something, they actually have someone that actually uses their expertise to help you get to whatever goal you need in a short amount of time. And also have the accountability partnership of it.
Accountability, especially with your goals, is so huge, because
It
if it's
is.
just you could easily be like, well, I don't feel like doing that today, or push it off. But when you
Yeah.
have a coach or you have an accountability person, they're going to be on your ass just a little bit more. Or like, I'm one of those people who's like, I don't want to let my coach down. So I'm like,
Yes.
I'm gonna make
Yes.
sure I get all my stuff done, or
Yeah.
it's good or whatnot. So it is really, especially with your goals, I think it is so huge to have a coach, and especially for that accountability aspect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the number one reason to have a coach, is for accountability, to help you reach your goals a little bit faster. But again, as a coach, we can't force you to do anything. You still have to do the work.
Yes, I do want to emphasize that, because you could hire me as a coach, but and I could give you everything you need to succeed, but you still got to work out, and you
Oh, yeah.
still got to eat right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to still do the work.
Yes.
So with that being said, I mean, you've been in the military for almost 3 decades, and then you have a successful business. For anyone who's listening, what are some key life lessons that you want someone listening to take away?
I think a big key lesson that I always tell everyone is, trauma is part of life. If you are human, you have been through some traumatic event, whether it's going through a divorce, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's losing a parent, whether it's going to war, it's just part of life. And I think the biggest lesson and advice I have is that don't let those traumatic events control you. You control it. So you use it as your superpower to learn a lesson from whatever that trauma was, and how are you going to do that and do things differently in your next chapter. And that's probably the biggest lesson. I think, I was kidding around. I wasn't kidding around when I said that people will tell you, if they say anything about Elise, they'll say, Elise is the most resilient person you'll ever meet. Plus, she's got a wicked sense of humor. But I think that the biggest thing is, despite all the traumas and dramas that I've been through in my life, I don't dwell in it too much. It just, what, that's life. That divorce really sucked. That relationship really crushed my heart. But I'm not going to give that power to that person or that event. I'm going to move on and keep living, because life is short, and if you spend a lot of time in misery, ruminating on what happened in Afghanistan or what happened in that situation, then you're giving that situation more power than it deserves, and you're giving away your power. So when things happen to you, figure out, where's the lesson here? How do I move forward? If you need therapy, get a fucking therapy. Just get therapy. Talking to someone else that is an objective listener can really change your perspective and mindset. And if you go to a therapist and that therapist doesn't click with you, then find somebody else, because working with a therapist is like a relationship. So you have to find someone that you click with. If you're dealing with deployment stuff, try to find a therapist that's been deployed. Try to find a therapist that's been a veteran, because they can relate and they can understand your struggles. Having that resiliency is just part of life. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in being a victim and whatever it is that happened to us, that we forget that life is for living. Everyone's been through shit. I hear so many stories on a daily basis from clients of things that they've been through and their kids have been through and their spouses. And everyone has a story. Everyone has had trauma. Everyone has been through stuff. The question is, how do you utilize that to power your next chapter and to change and break the cycle so that you're not ruminating and staying stuck in whatever it is, whatever crap you were in? So that's the biggest takeaway I have. And that might sound harsh, but it's not being harsh. It's just in a loving way saying, life is short, live your best life, and don't get stuck in things that are in the past, because that's not your future. And if you continue to ruminate on things that you can't change because they've already happened, you're not doing yourself or anyone else along you in service.
That's such a huge takeaway. Like, I love it. Because you're right, because everyone's been through something. Like, if you talk to anyone, like, they have a story to tell, but it's what they do to overcome that and move forward. That
Yeah.
trauma is still going to be a part of you. That is part of
Mhm.
your story, but
Yeah.
we can't live in the trauma.
And that's not fun. You can't, to me too, it's like, after I got divorced, I was in this relationship where it ended very, very poorly. And it would have been so easy for me to get stuck in the poor mistake of judgment that I did on that person and giving them that much of my heart. And I could have really gotten stuck there. And I did not. I was like, you know what? They don't deserve that power over me and my story. And I will continue to thrive and move on. And to me, it's like living your best life is the biggest revenge. And so I always make sure that I'm not saying don't cry it out. I can't tell you. I'm sure there were plenty of days that I cried over it. And there were plenty of days where I probably in my head was cursing people out. But I didn't stay stuck in that space very long because I knew it didn't serve me. And, and I always tell people too, whatever story you're telling yourself, would you tell your best friend that story? Would you tell your children that story? No, you would tell your children, you would be supportive and loving, but you stop having that negative talk over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know what? That person or that thing that happened doesn't care. It's in the past. That other person that hurt you, they've moved on. They have moved on with their lives. They have moved on to the next person or whatever. Don't let that affect you to the point where it's making you sick and really not moving you forward in a positive direction in your next chapter. So, yeah.
I love that you said about the whole, like, would you say this to, your spouse, your kid or whatever? Because I do think because we are our own worst critic that
Mm-hmm.
it's easier for us to do that negative self-talk, but there is some psychology. Again, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't speak on it, but there is something that re-triggers your brain when you do that positive self-talk and those affirmations. And so change that thought process, change your mindset from negative to positive. And I love that self-reflection question. Like, would you say this to someone that you care about? And that really could change, your outlook and mindset on a lot of different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I'm having this struggle right now. I'm going to be really vulnerable and tell you that right now, business has been really challenging for me and I'm trying to figure out, does this really bring me joy? And the thing is, it's not helping people. That is exciting. And I love doing that. That doesn't change. I love hearing people's stories, but just the business model that I work, I just don't know if it's the right fit for me. And it took me being in this business for a few years for me to realize that. And sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes you have to try different things out and figure out if it works for you or not. And sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith and figure it out and don't think of it as a failure if it doesn't work out. It just means that was what you needed to be doing at that particular point in your life. And now you learned your lesson. Now you move forward with something else. So, that's another thing. I'm very open to taking risk and putting myself out there because to me, it's all a learning opportunity. And I won't put myself in direct life and death danger because I'm not stupid, but I always think it's like, when you think about business, it's like the worst thing that can happen is I could lose. And in fact, I told my mom this because my mom completely lost her mind when I told her I was going to start my own business and that I was investing in a franchise. And she's like, what are you doing? You have all this education, all this experience. And I said, Mom, you questioned me when I joined the military and it was the best thing I ever did. Unlike most people, because I know there's a lot of people that have had good careers, but there's a lot of negativity around the military. I had a great career. I have a beautiful family of friends that are like that are just family that have been there through divorces, surgeries, my son getting sick. Right now, one of my dear friends that I met on deployment is going to be taking care of my mom this week because she's in Virginia and I'm in Washington, and frankly, I just can't get over there. So there's so many beautiful lessons through my military career, which to me will always be the highlight of my professional career. And were there good and bad? Yeah, of course, there's good and bad to everything. But I don't dwell on the bad. I dwell on the positive. And I'm not Pollyanna. Listen, I hate Pollyanna people, but I'm very realistic. But I just try to focus on if it's an opportunity that I want to try. And actually, if you see behind me, it says be brave. Take that leap of faith and figure it out. And if it doesn't work out, just move on to the next thing. It's just a lesson.
It reminds me of the quote from Thomas Edison where he failed 10 times and he's like, I didn't fail 10 times. I found 10 ways it doesn't work.
Yes, I love that quote. Yes, absolutely.
It's okay to pivot. I mean, if you talked to me 15 years ago, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I am not a lawyer. And then I pivoted. And then, I keep pivoting. And now I'm back in school because I'm still trying to figure out what the fuck I want to do with my life. So, like,
aren't we all, girlfriend? Aren't we all?
So, I mean,
wait. I want to know, what are you in school for?
Physical therapy. So hopefully this is the right track. My husband says no more degrees after this one because I keep like pivoting. But I mean, you have to try and see what you like, see what you don't like. Like, you don't want to get into something and then just because you did the education, you're like fucking stuck with it for 40 years.
Yeah.
You said, life is short. Do what you want. And if you enjoy something that you like, if you're doing something that you enjoy, you're probably not going to be really working like that corny quote, like you're never going to work a day in your life. So, I mean, it is okay to pivot and it is okay to start anew regardless of age, right?
Absolutely.
So I want people to take that away.
Yeah. It's so funny. I'm glad we talked about this because I just remember something too, is one of the things that drives me crazy when people are getting out of military service, they think that they must have a job and they think, oh my God, I got to stay in government or in the military system. I'm like, please don't do that. Please take some time to reflect. I know what I forgot to do in transitioning and something that I didn't do. Take some damn time off. Go hiking, go fishing, go travel, go do something. But don't go from leaving the military and go working your job on that Monday after you got out of the military on Friday. That is the worst thing you can do. And it will burn you out and you will not truly understand or know who you are as a person because you've been indoctrinated in that military system for, let's say, 4, 5, 40 years, 27 years. You get out of the military, you really don't know who you are. You don't know what are the things that really bring you joy. What is the things that you really want to, how you want to be spending your life, and take that time to reflect because Brittany, like you, I just finished a coaching certification. Did I really need to be spending that money? Probably not, but it was a learning experience and it'll help me in my business. But I was kind of playing around with going in and getting my MBA and I'm like, do I really need another degree? So I need to figure out what it is that I really want to do. And that's kind of like a big struggle when people are coming out of service, especially if you spent more than a term in the military. If you spent more than 4 years in the military and you were indoctrinated in the system and the military told you how to do everything. Now you get out and you really don't know, what am I supposed to be doing? I am constantly on the search for my purpose in life. Constantly.
Yeah. Honestly, and I had that struggle too. Like, I joined right out of high school. I did 8 years and then I got out and I was like, the military was all I knew. And like right out of high school. So, I mean, you're right. I think it is important to, find what brings you joy. Take some time, figure out what you want to do. And realize that you're not behind because I know it was something that was my big struggle was seeing my peers or people in my age group that didn't go in the military they're already in their careers, already setting up for, their family and stuff like that. And here I am, I'm like, should I go back to school? And, one thing that my husband would always tell me is like, Brittany, like, stop, you're not behind. He was like, you have traveled the world. You have served your country.
You have so many experiences that most people will never get.
Exactly. And, he's the one that has to constantly remind me. He's like, you've already done so much and it's okay to, figure out what you want to do and stop feeling like you're behind.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And I think that's another takeaway. It's like when in fact, I had a client today, her son wanted to join the military and she just felt that education was the only way for him. Now he's been out of high school for 10 years and all he's still thinking about is joining the military. And I finally told her at the end of the call, I was like, I don't think you realize, but I'm a 27-year retired military veteran. And, the military is what you make of it, just like anything else. And she had the perceived notion, just like so many civilians do that don't understand the military. This like, well, the military is for kids that don't really have any other resources, don't really know, like the recruiters go into bad neighborhoods. And I was just like, I literally was feeling my blood pressure go up. And I was like, okay, Elise, take a deep breath, because this is why you talk about the military as much as you do, because you want people to understand that the military is just an education and training organization that happens to serve our country. That's it. We are like every other organization. If you're not doing your job, you're not going to get promoted. If you're not seeking further to your education, you're not going to get promoted. It is an organization that is full of such talent, intelligence, great innovation, beautiful people. Are there bad people in it? Yeah, but there's bad people in every organization. Are there bad leaders in the military? Absolutely. And there's bad leaders in corporate America too. It's just the military gets such an interesting rap from people that don't know the beauty of the organization that I don't get it. It's so frustrating to me. I have traveled the world. If I hadn't joined the military, I would have never traveled as much as I've traveled.
Same.
I would have never had the education that I have. I came out of the military with 2 masters and no student loan debt. Now, granted, there are plenty of people that serve in the military and don't take advantage of those benefits. But if you're in the military, you should definitely get out after 4 years. You should have some kind of degree. I don't care what the hell your job is. Instead of gaming and bullshitting and drinking, if you really want to finish your degree, you can. You can.
Yep.
So don't tell me that you can't, because I know plenty of people that, including me, when I was in the military, yeah, I partied and had fun and traveled or whatever, but I also finished my bachelor's, my master's, my second master's I don't count because the military actually paid me to go to that. But what a gift. What corporation is going to send you to go get your master's for free and go to school full time?
Yep.
It's just, I know the military gets a bad rap and it really drives me crazy, because I think that the military also makes us stronger. It teaches us so many lessons. It exposes us to life lessons that we may not have gotten as a kid. And it creates a discipline in us too, and a drive that most civilians don't get. Now, are there shitbags in the military? Absolutely. There's plenty of shit. But there's plenty of shitbags in the corporation and regular civilian world too. But it's what you make of it. And again, this is the thing. It's what are you making out of those opportunities?
Yeah.
What are you making out of these opportunities? What are you taking advantage of? When I see clients at the spa, and I see a lot of military, that come in for, the where I work now, it's kind of my bullshit job in the sense that I'm doing laser hair removal and that kind of stuff. But they get a lot of kids that are coming in on active duty or whatever. And I tell them, I was like, listen, take advantage of every training, every educational opportunity, every assignment they give you, because that's why you're in the military. Don't deny an assignment to Germany because you're scared. You will get there, and it will be the best assignment of your life if you take advantage of it.
That's what happened to me. Honestly, I didn't want to go overseas. I put Hawaii down as my overseas wish list, and I got sent to Germany. And I was actually really upset about it. I don't looking hindsight. I'm like, oh wow. But I went over there. It was one of the best assignments. I got to travel all over Europe on the government dime. And I think, a lot of people, someone asked me the other day, what advice would you give a young airman? And I'm like, try to go overseas.
Absolutely.
Because when are you going to have the time or the opportunity to go overseas, live in a different culture, make money, travel, and then if you're in the military, it's on the government dime. And I always say, try to go overseas once. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, which is fine. But you're right. Make the most of every assignment. Take advantage of the education benefits. I always tell people too, I'm like, use TA, tuition assistance. Do not tap into your GI Bill until you're out, because you're going to lose on so much money. And take advantage of what you have.
It's being very savvy to what the military can do for you as much as what you do to serve in the military. And people get in the military and if they don't have a mentor or they're not a savvy kind of person, they lose out on so many great opportunities. And that's kind of really sad, because the whole point of the military is that you're there to learn and you're there to experience and have adventures. And that's what the military was for me. And like I said, to me, it will always be my number one best professional achievement and accomplishment. And if I had to do it all over again, I absolutely would go back in the military. Despite Afghanistan, despite all the shitty crap that I've been through, the military was still a life defining career for me. And, like I said, my husband now, he's civilian, totally civilian. And when we went on our first date, I basically told him all my shit because I was like, listen, I'm like at the point in my life where I was like, here's all my shit, take it or leave it because I don't really care. And he didn't even really, because he's civilian, like through and through. No family members ever went in the military, knew nothing about the military. It was so funny because his brother, who was an engineer and did patents and stuff with the government, he was like, hey, I met this woman and she's like a retired lieutenant colonel and she served in Afghanistan. And his brother was like, holy shit, she's a badass. So he comes back to me a few days later. He's like, I heard you're a badass. And I'm like, yes, I am. But what's pretty
You are,
but it's just that, I don't know. I think the biggest thing is that I would love to do is just educate the civilian sector on the beauty of the military. Is it perfect? No organization is perfect, but I think it is what you make of it. And, I think that there's things that the military needs to work on, but yeah, I think it's a lot of it is what you make of it and what situations you find yourself in and make the best out of those situations as well.
I agree.
You got to be savvy. You got to be savvy. My mom always said when I came back from Afghanistan too, she goes, you've been so blessed that you haven't had any issues with sexual assault or, I didn't get dismembered when I was at war and all of that. And I said, I think an angel was watching over me, but I also was pretty savvy and didn't put myself in situations where they weren't safe or unsafe. I mean, I can always read a room. So if I knew I was in a place or it was with someone that I didn't necessarily feel safe with, that's, I need to get out of that situation immediately. So sometimes we have to take ownership too for being naive and all of that, and it's just kind of a life lesson. As women, almost if you talk to, I think it's like one or two out of 5 women have had some kind of sexual assault or sexual experience. I was sexually assaulted when I was 16 or whatever, but again, like I said, I don't dwell on that. And in fact, when I came back from Afghanistan and I went to therapy, my therapist I was like, listen, lady, that was a long time ago. I don't think about that. I don't dwell on that. It's time to move on. Let's talk about the shit I'm dealing with. But that's just, again, that's me. I just that's where I have this like weird gift of, that's just how I look at life. But yeah.
I love it. Well, I appreciate you so much taking the time on sharing all of your expertise. If someone wanted to get in contact with you, how can someone find you?
Probably the easiest way would be LinkedIn. I'm under Elise Salamone, and I sent you the link if you want to post it. But I'm on Instagram, but Instagram and Facebook are just kind of my play stuff. Like, I just talk about travel and my dogs and all of that. But if you're interested in franchising and you don't know where to start, my services are free of charge, kind of like a real estate agent. I don't get paid unless you decide to move forward with something and the money doesn't come from you. But there's a lot of really great opportunities out there. I think the biggest thing is to realize that there is an investment level and you do have to have some kind of resources. But that said, I can help you talk to the funding partners or whatever so that you can figure out how to get there. And I can help you find there's some really cool opportunities there. There really are. And like I said, veterans make some of the best franchise owners in the country and in the world. So there's a lot of great opportunities. So feel free to reach out to me if you're interested and just want to learn. And I can just kind of guide you through that journey.
Awesome. And I'll add all those links into the show notes as well. So please reach out to her. Like I said before, franchising is a very, not foolproof, but if you want to get into the business realm, franchising is a really, really good option because like I said before, it is kind of all laid out for you. So take advantage of her services, especially since she said it's free and it's like a real estate and you're not the one paying. So take advantage. Well, Elise, thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely.
Everyone who is listening, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Until next time, we will talk to you soon.